So we're going to start a new series this week on the life of Samson. I hope this is something that makes a lot of sense. I hope that's something that you really enjoy. But to do this, we're going to need to like open the fire hydrant this morning. So get ready. We're going to have to run a lot of things across your lap, through your brain, between your ears, as we start to talk about the life of this Old Testament character. If you've ever been around church, or maybe you just on a Sunday morning as a kid, you flipped on a TV channel, if you know anything about Samson, it probably has to do with the fact that he got tied up with a young lady named Delilah. And if you know that story, we'll get there, so hang on to that. But I figure that's worth mentioning. Delilah is this one character from the scriptures that's kind of like a character in my life, right? In my family, we joke all the time that we have a family name. My very German family had a great family name until one man came along in history, messed it up for everybody. And now nobody in my family is named Adolf anymore. You don't find a lot of Delilahs, but parents consider it. I think it's a really sweet name. I like it. But because of this one character, not so much anymore. Samson exists in a series of stories that we often today kind of push out of our heads. I mean, it's part of that unique place of the scriptures. There's all of this stuff. We know he's got long hair, right? If you know anything about him, we know he kind of had some superhuman strength. He liked to kill his enemies with the jawbone of a donkey, which sounds really cool if you're a dude. If you're not, it sounds weird. But that's, and to be honest, I this week, the first thing that pops into my head when I think about Samson is this. Look at the screen. Look at this picture. Not this one right here. The next one. See, this pops into my head. So unfortunately for me, my Old Testament stories get a little messed up, right? Because at times it feels cartoon-esque, right? The Old Testament feels at times like it's not real. Like there's stories of floods. We were talking about this morning, a group of us. There's floods, right? There's all kinds of bizarre things. People get murdered in strange ways. A guy with a tent peg through the head. If you don't know that story, we'll get there one day. I mean, it's just bizarre stuff. And so often we put this in a category, a place where we just think it didn't really happen. But the thing is, it is a real story. It's about real people. It's about real places. It happened in a real time. And the reason we're going to talk about it is, first of all, Jesus talked about all these stories. He was always talking about them. But second, because it is a real story. The Old Testament, it carries so much validity. If you missed our last series, go back and pick it up. You can find it on our website. But I just want to say something. If you've never considered it, I would invite you to go do the research. Consider that the Bible has more veracity. It's been proven over and over again that it can be trusted simply by the same standards we use to test any literature in our culture. So it carries a lot of weight. And the thing I really like about the Old Testament more than anything else, and perhaps this story we're about to look at, is because the Bible leaves it messy. Like when the writers wrote this, I feel like if I had written it, I would have cleaned it up. Right? If I'm writing about my faith, if I'm writing about my belief system or my church, I'm going to write it in such a way I want people to think well of my life, of my church, of my faith. But the Bible leaves it messy because life is messy. So today, we're going to jump back over 3,000 years to a story that I think still has application today. Now, as we do that, let me start to give you some background, okay? So put on your seatbelts, a lot of stuff. I'm going to talk fast. My wife is not in here today. She's always telling me when I talk fast. She's not in here. I'm just going to say it for the tape. I am talking fast today. Here we go. The story of Samson. If you back up and begin to look at the Bible, you have to think about the books of the Bible as they are laid out. Now, in the Old Testament, there's 39 different books, and let me show you a picture of this. Now, I don't know if you can see this very well, but in the Old Testament, we have the first 5 books are called the Law. The next series of books is called the History, and then we have poetry, and then we have the prophets, and they get broken down into major and minor prophets. These are giant categories of how the Old Testament books are organized, okay? So if you ever want to read the Bible straight through chronologically, you've got to go buy a special Bible, because when it got put together and bound for some reason in God's sovereignty and wisdom, they got put under these types of headings. Now, these headings, when you get to things like major and minor prophets, That's not like some prophets were better than others, they had higher ranks. No, it simply means if it's a minor prophet, it's a shorter book. Isaiah is a longer prophet, he's a longer book. Major prophet, Malachi, not so long, gets relegated to a different place. So let me say this. If you don't understand this, it affects how you think about the Bible. Because if we're in a section that's poetry, we need to look at the Bible, look at the words as if they're poetic, right? Anybody hear a song on the radio today when we use all kinds of word images and pictures, right? We talk about love in certain ways, we compare it to ice cream or whatever, and that's not really how love is, right? But this is the same thing in the scriptures. The writers will use certain types of literature to describe what's going on. So you have to know that. The story of Samson is going to fall within the history section of the Old Testament. Okay, so this is after the law has been given. The story of Samson will unfold. Here's the beginning of his birth. Judges 13, verse 1 says this, and the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. After Genesis, in the garden, man and woman, mankind walked away from God. We decided in the garden that we were going to choose how to best live our lives. We decided how life would be flourished in our world. We decided what would make our lives flourish. We decided what was best for us. When you talk about sin in the Bible, so oftentimes we all get a picture of a list of things. And if you had a childhood where maybe you went to a certain type of church and there was just all these lists of things that you were not supposed to do to be a good Christian, right? And that those things were hammered into you in such a way that the list became more sacred than anything else. That's a problem. Why? Because the list is not what we're talking about. Sin in the scriptures, starting in Genesis, when Adam and Eve walked away from God together, right, was when we decided we were no longer going to flourish the way God wanted us to flourish. We didn't need the Creator to tell us how to live our lives. Pride set in. And once that started, God put a plan into play to redeem us, to help restore relationship. And as he did that, he started to interact with culture, with our world, where we were at that time. I love that idea. God always enters a culture where people are at. And so that's what he did. And he started working with mankind through things called covenants. Okay, so we have this covenant relationship. You've heard of contracts, right? Anybody buy a house in the last year? If you bought a house, right, you had to go in. You signed a lot of papers. They gave you a bunch of pens, made you feel like you were doing really good. But you were signing your life away in all of these pages. And what happens on those pages? It defines what happens if either party messes up. If you break the contract, it tells you in the contract what's going to happen, right? God used covenant relationship with us. What he did was he started to work with us in a way we can understand, where he started to reach out to mankind and say, if you will walk with me, then I will be your God. And it's this if-then kind of conditional relationship. But the thing is it was all based on God, not on us. So over and over again in the Old Testament, you're going to see mankind walk with God for a while and then fall away, walk with God and fall away, walk with God and fall away. And over, God continues to stay faithful. It's not like a contract. If it was a contract, he would walk away he'd wash his hands. He'd be tired of all of us. If he was the bank, he'd foreclose on your house, right? You stop making the payments. I want the house. I'm done with you, right? But the covenant is based on God. It's based on his character, who he is. Now, as we move into the New Testament, this is going to be a bit of a whiplash here, but let me carry this forward to bookend this thing. As you go from the Old Testament to the New Testament, something changes. We call the Old Testament, that actually means Old Covenant, because it was the first covenant. It was the first way that God began to interact with us. In the New Testament, everything changes. The Old Testament points towards the New Testament. It points towards the need for a Savior. It points towards the need for everything to change. And so Jesus shows up on the scene, and listen, in the Old Testament, by the time we get to the end of it, the rabbinical law, along with the 10 Commandments, there are 613 laws. 613 laws to keep up with. Can you imagine? I mean, that's a book in and of itself. And yet, when we get to the New Testament, the New Covenant, as it starts to come into play, Jesus says this in John 13. He says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another, just as I have loved you." Now, that's going to be important because eventually we're about to see him love us to death, right? So he's starting to put the weight of this whole thing on us. He's saying, 613 were meant to point you to a direction, and here it is, love one another. Verse 35, "By this, all people are going to know that you're my disciples, if you have love one for another." So as Christians now, he's changing everything. The old covenant, he's coming on the scene because we couldn't keep the covenant. We kept messing it up. We kept getting mad at God. We kept taking the flourishing back. We kept saying, "I can do this, God. I don't need you, God. I'll make my own way in life." And so we kept walking with God for a while and falling away, walking and falling away. Maybe you even experience that today, right? So Jesus shows up. And the old covenant's not working, but it's pointed us to where we need to go. And so he starts to talk more about it. Luke 22, the night before his crucifixion, they're at the table. They're having this intimate time together. We call it communion today. And they're taking the bread and he's breaking it. And then he's taking the cup and he passes it around. And in Luke 22, verse 20, he says, when he'd taken the cup after they'd eaten, he says, "This cup is poured out for you. It's a new covenant in my blood." It's the last covenant. It's the covenant that we've been waiting on. Because all the covenants in the Old Testament, we kept breaking them. We kept falling away. And God continued to stay faithful and point us to the future, saying, you need somebody else. You need a Savior. You need a new covenant that'll last forever. Because you keep messing it up. Now God sounds like a father, right? Anybody have that run in with your parents one day? Like, stop messing it up. Well, God as a parent, I'm sure at times was just, he wasn't wringing his hands, but he's going, you keep messing it up. But I want to show you something. See, he didn't like a parent lose his cool. He didn't like a parent wring his hands and worry. He just said, let me show you something. And then when Paul starts to talk about this, the last New Testament verse for a while, Hebrews 8, verse 13, Paul says, in speaking of this new covenant, he, Jesus, makes the first one obsolete. And what is becoming obsolete and growing old is ready to vanish away. Paul says, this old covenant, this thing you've studied for several thousand years, this way that God has been working with you, there's now a new way, a better way. It's unconditional. All you have to do is come. And he says, this old is going to pass away. And why that's important is because he says this around 63 or 64 AD. If you stayed awake in history class, if you paid attention a little bit, you know that in August of 70 AD, Rome destroyed the temple. Why is that important? Because 6 or 7 years after Paul wrote this, basically, the world lost the old covenant. It was never practiced again. Everything about the old covenant that had been practiced, the sacrifices and the going to the temple, was lost for good and has still been lost to this day. That old covenant died. That old covenant is gone and will not be practiced like that again. So God is working through these covenants. So as you read through the Old Testament, it seems a little clunky at times. It seems like maybe I don't understand why are there such extreme behavior and things. Well, first of all, a tent peg through the head sounds extreme until you turn on the evening news, right? Okay, so I just telling you, it's the same stories over and over again. But when you begin to understand the covenants and what God is doing, it makes more sense. So we had Noah, and what was the sign? The rainbow in the sky, right? We had Abraham. We had the covenant with Moses. We had the priestly covenant, and we had the last one, which was the Davidic covenant. The Davidic covenant is important because at this point, God says, somebody from the line of David will sit on my throne forever with me. Somebody will rule forever from this line. Now, in their thinking, they're looking for a person, right? They're looking for somebody on this earth. They're looking for God to set Israel up as a nation on this earth. But God was looking to the future, which is why in Matthew chapter 1, Matthew begins his account of the life of Jesus with this long list of names going all the way back to Abraham and Moses and walking them all the way up through David to the birth of Christ. That's the covenants. So the old covenant is gone. Now, the new covenant has come. But when Samson shows up, the old covenant is still in play. Go back to Judges 13 now. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Samson was born under this covenant system. God offered relationship through the covenant. Israel had been faithful for a while, but then Israel dropped the ball again, just like we do. Israel said, we know how to live our lives. We can make things flourish. We don't need you. And when things would get really bad, right? Because what happens if you don't follow the manual for your car, right? What happens? My mother-in-law, a few years ago, she went to take her car to have the oil changed, right? You know this is what has to happen. You got to change the oil in your car every few months. And as she pulled out of the oil change place, she didn't even get to make the right turn, and the car made a loud noise and died right there. Well, they did everything right except put oil back in the car. And yes, right? And she couldn't even get it out of the driveway of the oil change place, right? That's as far as it would go. When you don't follow the manual for a car to flourish, the car is not going to flourish. When you don't follow the life of God that He has for you, the way He's laid it out for you to flourish, life doesn't flourish very well. And you know what? Even sometimes when you follow very closely in a broken world, life doesn't flourish. So we're back with the Israelites, and they're not following. They've taken ownership of their lives back, and they've gotten punished by God. Essentially, He put them in a place where punishment, what does it do, parents, when you punish your child? You're hoping that they realize something, right? You're not trying to be mean to a child. You punish a child because you love a child, because you want them to develop. You want them to stay healthy. You want them to learn a lesson, right? So my biggest thing as a kid was, I would tell you, if you don't understand this, then you didn't grow up in the greatest generation ever, but we had big wheels, and we would forever run those things out into a busy street, right? Like down, I had a little bit of slope on my driveway, and we would just run those things straight. So mom and dad, what do? They come out, you're going to get in trouble. You're in trouble, whatever the punishment was. Why? Because they kind of don't want their kid. They spent all this money on me up to that point, bought the big wheel, really don't want to lose them in a car wreck, right? That's what's going on. So God's turned them over to the hand of the Philistines, and basically the Philistines have been really not good to them. Now, the Philistines weren't as bad as others, but they are a group that were part of the pagan community. When, in the Old Testament, God distinguishes between Israel and pagan communities like the Philistines, it's not about ethnicity, it's not about skin color, it's not about who your mother is, who your daddy is. It's about following God. That's it. So when the Philistines are talked about as this evil people, it's because it's talking about a world system, a world view that's opposite of who God is, of what He wants us to do, to follow Him, to be in relationship, to flourish. It's these polar opposites. It's a good Star Wars story. It's good and evil here. And that's what's going on. And so as that happens, God begins to provide a deliverer. Now, He's done this before, but we're in a series in the history of Israel where He's using this group called judges. Okay, they're not kings. These are men that would come on the scene, and God would work directly with them, and He would use them to deliver His people. As He does that, Samson is a unique guy. Now, I'm going to back you up again. We're going to go to Numbers 6. Somebody told me this morning, they said, hey, I saw you're going to be in Numbers this week. That's really cool. I'm like, I don't think you understand numbers, man. It gets boring sometimes. But let me try to make this come alive a little bit. I mean, we don't spend enough time in some of these verses. So let's do this. Number 6. This is where God starts to describe the vow that Samson is going to live under. Here it goes. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel and say to them, when either a man or a woman makes a special vow, the vow of the Nazirite, to separate himself to the Lord, he shall, watch this, separate himself from wine and strong drink. He shall drink no vinegar made from wine or strong drink, and shall not drink any juice of grapes or eat grapes, fresh or dried. All the days of his separation he shall eat nothing that is produced by the grapevine, not even the seeds or the skins. He says the first step in this vow, this very special vow, this Nazirite vow, is that you don't have any alcohol. In fact, you don't even get any raisins on this deal, all right? Just stay away from all things that appear evil, and it's really not the evil side, it's just a special circumstance. Because look, he also says it doesn't have to be forever, but while you're in the vow, right? Verse 5. So that was the first part. Second, all the days of his vow of separation, no razor shall touch his head. Until the time is completed for which he separates himself to the Lord, he shall be holy. He shall let the locks of his head grow long. The locks of his hair grow long. That's my son's life verse right there. Used to be mine, but I don't like long hair because it just wears me out. He says the second thing is you have to not shave your head. You don't cut your hair. It's got to grow. It's just second part of the vow. Why? Because God said. It's nothing special. It's just God says, I want you to do this. This is going to be an outward sign. Next part, verse 6. All the days that he separates himself to the Lord, he shall not go near a dead body, not even for his father or for his mother, for his brother or sister. If they die, shall he make himself unclean, because his separation is to God is on his head. In other words, his separation is to God alone, and to keep that separation, you can't even break it for family members. So you don't go touch anything dead. Verse 8, all the days of his separation he is holy, he is to be holy to the Lord. You don't touch anything dead. Parents, animals, nothing. You don't kill. You don't be a part of something that is dead. It's just a sign, but this is the vow. Now we read this today and you start to think, okay, that's bizarre. Like what that didn't even line up. Like I didn't take that vow, and I know a bunch of you didn't take that vow, right? No alcohol. Some of you, I know you don't take that vow. No cut your hair. A lot of you take that vow. Some of us take it because it's fallen out, right? So we want to keep it short, right? That's nice, right? Don't touch anything dead. I blew that all over the place in college with all the dead animals. But listen, it's weird, right? But how about if you think about it like this? If you get stuck in your life, if there's a place where you're looking for some kind of a breakthrough, you're a place that you're looking to hear from God in a special way, don't you sometimes do something to get yourself unstuck? Like let's just say your eating habits aren't that great. Mine are not that great right now. If your eating habits aren't that great and you're wanting to change your body, you're wanting to change how you feel, what do? Maybe you do a cleanse, right? You put yourself through something, a routine, a ritual. You give something up. If you're not exercising enough, what do? You join a gym and then pay a gym to not go to the gym. But that's what you do, right? You're trying to break out of something. If you have some emotional weight from your past, if there's some things that are bad, that are hard, things that weigh you down, right? Some trauma from your past, and you're stuck, what do? You go see a counselor. You go get with friends. You do something to get unstuck. If you're stuck at a certain place in your career, what do? You go get some more training because you want to excel in some capacity. Listen, we sacrifice time and money and things that are passionate to us. Why? So that we can have a breakthrough of some kind. That's a vow. Essentially, it's about denying things that we desire so that we can reach another level of discovery, so that we can have a breakthrough, right? Except God is using it in this instance to have a breakthrough with his people. And so he's chosen this one man. Now Samson didn't choose this vow, but this vow was chosen before he was even born. And his parents were instructed, and Samson will walk this vow out. He even agrees to it as he gets old enough to agree to it. But if we say it another way, here's what I want you to recognize, that a vow is simply a sign of our striving to have our beliefs drive our behaviors. have our beliefs drive our behaviors, right? You do this with God all the time. I don't recommend it, but what do? You throw up something to God and say, Lord, if you'll just help me in this area, I'll give you this. Or I'll do this if you'll just deliver me from this. Or, Lord, I promise I'll study harder next semester, right? If you just help me get this grade. The grades are on our heads at my house because it's finals time, right? But right, that's what we do. We tend to barter with God. We throw up these little vows, and the reality is we're trying hard to get our beliefs to be in control of our behaviors. Because we know what we want, but so many times we get it backwards, right? So this is Samson. This is the vow. This is what's going on. Judges 13:1. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord gave them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. He was chastising them. He was disciplining them. Verse 2. Now there was a certain man of Zorah, this is his tribe, his people, of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. And his wife was barren, and she had no children. And an angel of the Lord appeared to the woman, and he said to her, Behold, you're barren, and have not borne some children. That's like, tell me what I don't know, right? Verse 4. But, no, back up before 4. But you shall conceive and bear a son. Therefore, be careful and drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For behold, you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb, and he shall begin to save Israel from the hands of the Philistines. Samson is going to be the next judge. And when the angel shows up and starts to talk to his mom, what's happening is she already knows what's going on. When he starts to describe, you can't have any more drink. You got to live a certain way. Don't shave his head. Well, immediately in her mind, she's got to be thinking Nazarite. God's doing something. He's up to something here. Because she already knew, right, from the law, from the covenant, that this was God's way of working with his people. So she expected, she knew what to expect. That there would be no alcohol, no razor, no dead stuff. And that would include no messing around with Philistine women. Not because they're Philistine, but because in the Philistine circle, they're pagans. God doesn't want his people, right, to surrender their beliefs. And where's one of the greatest places where we surrender a lot of things? In marriage, right? It's a give and take. Right? And it's hard when a husband believes one way and a wife believes another. How much stress does that put on the relationship? And eventually there has to be compromise. And God's saying, this child's not going to live that way because I want to use him. Judges 14. Let's keep going. I'm going to give you now just a quick overview, and then the next few weeks we'll really start to unpack some of this stuff. Samson is grown. Verse 1. Samson went down to Timnah. And at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. Then he came up and told his father and his mother, I saw one of the daughters of the Philistines at Timnah. I'm guessing saw means a little more than saw. He way noticed her. Middle of verse 2. Now get her for me as my wife. Pretty clear? I saw this woman. I went down to the Philistines. I saw this woman, this people that we're supposed to stay removed from. We're not supposed to integrate our lives with their belief systems. Not that we can't be nice to each other. We're not supposed to integrate our lifestyles because they're pagans. They don't follow God. But he goes down to check it out. And lo and behold, they have pretty girls there too. And so he decides, this one's prettier than the rest. In fact, she's prettier than all of my other options back home. So he goes back to his mom and dad and says, get her for my wife. Verse 3. But his father and his mother said to him, now they know right from wrong. They know what the vow is. Watch this. Is there not a woman among our daughters of your relatives or among all of our people that you must go take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? See, because they're under the Abrahamic covenant. Circumcision is in play right now. But Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she is right in my eyes. She's right in my eyes. What happened in Genesis? Hey, doesn't that fruit look good? Doesn't it look good? Like I know God said don't eat it, but when they saw that it was good. Sin is not a list of things. Sin is us taking back from the Creator the way He created for us to flourish. It's Samson saying, she's right in my eyes, when everything God has outlined in His vow says, no, she's wrong for you. He's taken the vow. But we're going to start to see this tragic over and over and over in the life of Samson, this it's right in my eyes attitude. It's the core struggle. It's the thing we all wrestle with. How many times during the week do you start to make a decision that has nothing to do with the beliefs that you say you hold to from the Scriptures, but it's simply because it's right then? How many times do I do that? When it's right for me right now. I just want to be here in this space. I want to live my life this way. I'm tired of consulting other people. I'm tired of talking to God about it. I just want to do what I want to do. That's what sin is. It's not about finding a list somewhere. It's about the heart. It's about us pulling back that ability to flourish, saying we know what is right more than God knows. Now, keep going. Verse 4. His father and his mother did not hold out very long. His father and his mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. So this is an interesting verse, because when you get here, you think to yourself, oh, okay, so God's letting this happen. Like it says it, that the opportunity is going to be for God. He's going to use it. So it must be that Samson can do this thing. It says his parents didn't really know that, but they went ahead and did what he wanted. And when you read that, this is again the Old Testament conversation, the language. I think it's you know what we like to hear? We like movies and YouTube videos and everything that jumps up and gives our opinion, our position, and tells everybody why they're wrong, right? What did I tell you a while ago? The Bible leaves it messy. We already know what's right. The Nazirite vow has outlined things. The covenant has outlined things. Samson knows. His parents know. But what's about to happen, God is still going to use. Yet another horrible thing hit the news this week. Somebody who is well respected in the evangelical community, the president of a seminary that's in the Metroplex, has been there for years. And things come out about things he has said and ways he's done ministry and things he's said to women who have suffered at the hands of abusive husbands. Horrible, really, things about what he has counseled. And it causes us a lot of times to go, how could that be? Like, how could he even be a Christian and hold that view? That's what we find in the Old Testament. Over and over again, we find that we keep leaving the way that God wants us to pursue, to flourish, and we do our own thing, and God's going to use it in spite of us. That's the great hope. When you follow Jesus, it's no matter how bad you mess it up, the hope is He's still there and in control, right? So Samson, well, where we get Simon from, Samson is going to get the girl when he shouldn't. He's going to take his covenant lifestyle and he's going to throw it out the window, and he's going to blend his life with somebody who doesn't know God. But God is determined. God is God, and God is still going to work it out. Verse 5. Then Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah. And they came to the vineyards of Timnah. What grows in vineyards? What are we not supposed to be touching? All right, we're getting there. And behold, a young lion came forward toward him, roaring. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. Who's him? You can say it. Samson. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces as one tears a young goat. Now, I don't tear young goats. I'm just guessing this is a bloody mess, okay? So somebody has been tearing young goats. It's another thing I get. But he did not, watch, he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. When he tore the lion, what was he touching? A dead animal. Who did he not tell? His parents. Then, verse 7, he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes again. After some days, he returned to take her. Take her. And he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion, and they'd already started making some honey. And so what did he do? He reached in, he scraped it out into his hands and went on eating as he went. And he came to his father and his mother, and what did he do? He gave some to them to eat. He did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion. See, we read this, and you know what the first thing we see is? We stop. Even as kids, you're so enamored with this guy, Samson. He gets to do all this cool stuff. I mean, he rips a lion apart to pieces. I would have paid to see that. That's better than WWE. That's better than any of the mixed martial arts going on today. If I get to, that's just, as a dude, that's like I'm going, I need to see that. Like, I can't even fathom how you rip a lion apart, right? The average lion's going to take any of us out. Don't get on your high horse. You know you couldn't rip a lion. But it says the Spirit of the Lord rushed on him. And you know what we do? It must be good. God's with him. God gave him power to overcome the lion. And the scripture is silent. But what do you know? Don't touch anything dead. Don't kill things. It's part of your vow. It's part of who God has called you to be. And the Spirit of the Lord had to rush on him to keep him safe in that situation because God still wanted to use Samson. God is faithful to his covenant. So God never gives up no matter how many times you mess up. God never gives up no matter how many times you mess up. But we look at this and we read it and we stop right there and we think, oh my gosh, Samson, he's this great man of God. Like look at him. He has this power. He gets to do this cool thing. God must really love him. And what do? We start looking at that little result in his life and we think it's the stamp of God's approval. And we look at how much money is in our bank account and we think it's a stamp of God's approval. We look at the kind of cars we drive and we think it's a stamp of God's approval. Right? We look at all the trips we get to take and we think it's a stamp of God's approval. He must really love me. We look at so many things in our lives and we interpret that as a stamp of God's approval, when the reality is, right now in Samson's life, his beliefs are having zero impact on his behavior. He is not behaving as one who believes. He's strong. He has power. It looks outwardly like he's the next big guy. It looks like he is the guy to lead Israel out, right? It looks like he will be the judge who delivers them, which is great because God has ordained that. But the reality is his life is not on track with God. And what we see is we start to see this in our own lives. We start to measure things in our lives every day by what looks good, what seems right to us. And when we measure it that way, we're going to miss God. So what we think is power a lot of times is not. Right? What we think is power, what we think is strength is not. And here's where I want you to wind up this morning. Is that when we think about weakness, we need to think a little differently. From the life of Samson, when you look at what weakness is when your behaviors shape your beliefs. Weakness is when your behaviors, your drives, your passions, the things that seem right in your eyes, when that drives what you believe. Right? Because you have to change your beliefs when that happens. When my behaviors begin to shape my beliefs, I'm in trouble. I'm weak. Samson appears strong, but his faith is really weak right here. He's not to be modeled. He's not to be an example. Right? I just crushed everybody's flannograph Samson as a kid, right? Everybody had this idea that Samson was this Gaston character and he was great. But I'm telling you right here, he's weak. And he's not to be modeled at this moment. but God's still going to use them. And that's the great thing. So weakness is when your behaviors shape your belief. Power is when your beliefs shape your behaviors. Right? Power is when your beliefs shape your behaviors. I tell you this all the time. All truth is God's truth. So let's carry this through just a normal week. When my beliefs that if I eat correctly, it's good for my body, when that is strong and I do it, right, it'll shape my behaviors. I don't go to McDonald's for lunch. Sorry, McDonald's. Right? I'm not going to do it. When my beliefs shape my behaviors, there's power in that. When my belief that God is God begins to take root, it will shape my behaviors, how I respond all day long. Listen to me real quick. What do you believe? What do you believe? Because whatever you believe at your core, that's what's going to shape your behaviors. And look, we are all broken, and we do community around here together. We believe that it's better to be in community, right? More life change is going to happen in a small circle than anywhere else. But it's because in those small circles, we can all start to hold each other more accountable to what we say we believe. It's where we can lock arms and limp along together and challenge each other. So the times when our behaviors start to rise up, the passions, the drives, the desires, when the things that seem right to us start to really cause us to want to change our beliefs, we can join together and we can challenge each other and we can pull each other back, right? And that's what we offer. If you're a professing believer in Jesus Christ, this is the hope you offer the world. Look, I heard one guy say it this way, that Christianity is not about us hoping we get to improve the world till it becomes this really, really cool place, right? Christianity is about us carrying this kind of hope into a broken world. It's broken. So that our neighbors and our friends and our families can begin to see where real hope comes from. So what do you believe? What do you believe? Do you believe that Jesus Christ is that new covenant, that he's gotten rid of all the rules and basically has opened the way for you to have a relationship with God? And now, not that the rules are gone and you don't ever have to obey the Bible, but now it's not about obeying for the sake of earning God's favor, right? It's about me simply having faith in Christ, and that is my relationship with God. That opens the door for me to be able to walk with Him and to have this kind of hope. What do you believe? Where are you at in that belief? Do your behaviors dictate your week? Do they control the things that you want to do? Or do your beliefs allow you to have the power to shape your own behaviors all week long? It's a hard question. Let me pray for us.